Hello there. Thanks for joining me again. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to do a stream this or a pre-record this week. Lots of things going on, but anyhow, I was hoping I could post maybe today well, again, lots of things going on. So here we are. I'm not doing the live stream. It's going to be a pre-record. I want to try something a little bit, a little different again. I want to try and keep some nice fresh color going, but this color will be set off against grays. And grays are your friends, just so you know. If you have everything colorful all the time, then all those noisy colors keep trying to get your attention. So it's really important to create a backdrop that allows your color to say hello, or to sing, if you will. So I'm going to start with a base color when I begin here, and I'm putting down a magenta. It's a Winsor Newton magenta. I've got a mix of different colors. They're my standard palette. If you've been watching these programs in the past, you'll know I work with a warm and cool primary of each red, yellow, and blue. And if you need to know more about my palette, you can always check back. Magenta is not a color that I use very often, but I thought for this particular stream, it would be kind of interesting to give that a try. And it's fun to try some new colors now and then, So I'm going to take you to my board here. And in fact, I'm going to scoot right out of here. If I can do this, there we go. And sorry for all the wobbly. There we go. So the magenta I'm going to put down without a whole bunch of medium. I'm just going to put it down, and you'll see it's pretty bright. But that's going to give me a base color to work into. Some of the areas I'm going to leave a little clear. You don't know what I'm painting here, of course, because you can't see it. You can't see the image I'm working from. Something you can try, and I really recommend this, is to take your photos and just for fun, take them into Procreate. And if you don't have Procreate, it's an app that I really recommend. You can use it on your iPad or your phone. Of course, on your iPad, it's great because you can see things better. And I like it because you can play with color, you can layer color, and try a few things out before you commit completely to one thing. Get a sense of your composition. And actually, I'm working from a photo that was taken some years ago back in Nova Scotia. So this is kind of a rugged, rocky scene that you're going to see. Again, I'm starting with this magenta color. I could even really have it drier than that. I had a little bit of thinner in my brush here, this large brush. So that's the reason why it's looking the way it is. If I want, I can go through and smooth it down a little, let it set up, get rid of some of the brush strokes, and just get a nice, clean, transparent color going at this stage. As I paint over top of this color, it's going to find its way into the colors that I'm putting on top, but hopefully not too much. I want to try and keep it fairly subtle. And why would I choose magenta? Well, again, it's just kind of a feeling I want to get going. It's a color that does appear here and there. It's not that common in nature. You see it in, really bright flowers. If you're painting rocks, it's not something you would expect to see in rocks. However, now and then you will. I'm just trying to get kind of an even coat going here, somewhat. A little bit of texture, I'll leave some, but smooth it down mostly. Hoping that you're enjoying these programs. If you like what you're seeing, please thumbs up. It's always appreciated. And if you're not subscribed yet, would appreciate if you subscribe too. That way you can stay up to what I'm doing. You can keep, checking in on what I'm doing, and you can pass it on to your friends or anyone you think might be interested. Okay, so I'm going to use something here. It's a little different. I'm going to use a roller to put some of these colors down. And that's a little unusual, maybe. But you know, any tool is okay. And again, I'm going to see how this goes. I'm experimenting a little bit. This is just a little sponge roller. And I just want to get some nice clean color going down. It leaves its own texture behind. You can see it's fairly textured at this stage. These little lumps and bumps if the paint is not particularly well mixed. So that's something to be thinking about also. Try and keep some nice clean color on your palette, and that nice clean color transfers, of course, to your painting. I'm just going to take this clip out of here and bring the color down underneath it. I can always go back and make corrections when I need to later, of course. But at this stage, I want to keep really clean, simple colors going. There we go. And I'll go back in with a brush after, clean up areas that if I need to, which I'll probably need to do. If you've been watching these programs also, you'll know that I don't always take these things to completion in one session. I like to play with these things a little later as well and make a few changes when I've had time to sit back and look at it more. So you can see, even with a roller, you get these sort of brush-like qualities that happen when I drag the roller through the color like this. It's kind of neat. I'm going to change the color up a little bit. I'm going to get into some pinks, into these blues as I come up into this area. It's very subtle. And you see with the roller, it goes down nice and smoothly. Why not? Again, you can use any kind of tool you want to. There's no rules around this. One thing I will suggest, when you're using a roller, if you have a few clean rollers to work with, ready with for different colors, that's handy as well. They're not expensive, these things. And you can even use ones that you've painted with before, which I probably will do as well. So this is just to get some basic colors down. I haven't even drawn this out, as you can see. At a certain point in time, I want to make sure that I'm getting the compositional feel that I want overall. And I've got a basic sky in there now. I want to try to create a sense of, I want to get a sense of the composition here, because the composition really is the most important thing. In my opinion, it's the most important thing to get down so that you know where you're going, you have a plan. And again, that's one of the things that's nice about Procreate, because you can go into your Procreate program, your app, and just work out where you think you want things to go. Play with your shapes, get those working, and then when you go to do your painting, you're prepared ahead of time. You can see how little bits of magenta kind of peek through here. It's nice. I'm going to put in some darks here. This is about as dark as I'll go. Get some of this stuff in here. And again, this is not going to make a whole lot of sense until we're further along. Just want to put in some, I would call them kind of anchor points, if that makes any sense. Because I want to have points of reference as I'm going through to get my proportions working. And punch in a little more color here. Now the greens really pop out against the magenta. It's kind of nice. If you want to see someone who really knows how to work this color scheme or work with the magenta, you can look at Jennifer McChristian's work. Yeah, she's worth looking up. Originally from Canada, so you know, I love Canadian artists when I see them online anytime. I'm going to pop in a little more color back here, and this is where I want to be a little more precise with my composition. I want to get this feeling of color back here. And again, that magenta is going to come through in places. That's okay. Gives it a little bit of excitement and accidents. You know, these little mistakes that happen when you use a palette knife, because it's harder to control. It forces you to go for big shapes. That's what it does. So I'm going to put some blue back in here. Blues recede. Even though that's an intense blue, it still recedes. Blues go back, and yellows and oranges and reds, they tend to come forward. So the cooler colors, the blues and so on, will look like they're going into the distance. And to go in with another blue. And of course, you know, I'm not mixing as I work here. I've mixed several colors ahead of time so that I have something to make this move along a little quicker. And I'm not necessarily going from the background to the foreground. A lot of artists think that's what you have to do. Well, again, there's no rules around that. I put a little bit of that sky color in here just because it feels like it might be nice. When you put one color against another, they relate to each other. They're these sort of accidental visual zones that appear because you've got two colors that are related to each other in some way. Every color is related to the color next to it in one way or another. Sometimes you have a warm color beside a cool color, and that sets up a warm-cool relationship depending on the light source that you're working with. If you have a warm light, you've got cool shadow. And if you have cool light, you have warmer shadow. So that's a general rule. You see that in nature. So you can set up that relationship. The other thing that's nice is working with complementary colors. And that gets you into sort of the chromatic nature of light. And without getting too, specific about that, we see color and understand color. It's like everything that we look at is part of a rainbow, if that makes any sense, because of the way that color refracts. And so when we're painting, we can use this idea of color and refraction and just keeping your values correct. That's key. So they should be within the same value range. And when I talk about that, as I've talked about that in the past, you want to have a fairly accurate relationship of values when you're painting. The colors can change, but the values should be right. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're painting on these kind of things. Right now I'm just playing. This is kind of a little bit of detail without going crazy. I'll put more stuff into this area later when we're ready. I want to pop in a couple of more greens back there. And hopefully all of this will come to a point of making sense. I really do like working with a palette knife because it creates these accidental shapes. And of course you can go back and correct when you want to with a brush. That's quite fine to do that. I find using the brush too much gets me too sort of fiddly about things, if that makes any sense. So now having said that, I am going to take my big brush now. It has a little bit of magenta left in it. And I'm going to go into my darker color, which is like, again, the darkest one. And I'm just going to put some texture in here in the foreground, keeping it fresh and loose. I can go back in and add a little bit of color into that. Maybe I'll bring a bit of magenta and blue into that, just so that it's not boring in the dark areas and the shadow areas. And right now I'm just trying to draw something out with the brush that will make sense. I'm going to go into this now with actually a clean roller with some gray in the roller. So to do that, I have to take the roller off here. I'm using some gloves here, some plastic gloves, so that I don't make a mess of my hands. And I keep my color clean. Just snap in another roller and grab some gray and go into these areas here. You see, as soon as I do that, I get colors that mix together. That's kind of nice. And it brings up the textures that happen in this area too. Get a little more of that paint in there. Covers a large area quickly, and I like that. This, in theory, this should all come together fairly quickly because I have a fairly good idea as to what I want to paint. Well, usually we save our rollers for painting walls and things like that, but in this case, we can use it on our board or our canvases. I'm working on an oil primed board right now, if you're wondering. Okay, now I'm going to go into a color that I'm hoping will kind of hold things together. Let's just see. It's almost like a flesh color, really. And it's an area of light that's coming down through this area here. I'm really thinking quite abstractly right now. I'm not worrying too much about what the subject is. I'm really trying to focus on the shapes that I want to be present, that need to be present to make this thing work. Letting the palette knife do its business. Okay. I think I need to go into a slightly darker gray, but not as dark as this area down here. I'm letting this run. You can see that the thinner that was in my brush is really making this run down. It's quite a nice effect. I don't mind it. And I think I'm going to cool this gray down just a touch so it picks up some of the color from the sky. You know, the color of the sky affects the blues that you see in the sky. It, in particular, can affect all the colors that you're looking at as you work your way through a scene. And I sort of feel like that needs to be a bit darker. I want to get my values working properly. So, and I think I'm going to cool it down even more, a little more blue. And let's see if this is going to work. So I've mixed a lot of colors ahead of time, but you still end up having to mix other colors as you're painting, of course. Okay, that's a little better. It's a better gray, and that's going to appear in a couple of spots over here. I want to have this sense of movement, this motion that comes up through this area here. So I can even use my palette knife to give that sense. Using almost brushing it through, if you will, without getting too fussy. Again, I really don't want to get too fussy or too particular at this stage, or maybe even at any stage for that matter. Just let the palette knife do its thing, putting shapes down. And I'm going to go back into a little darker gray again. And I'm adding different colors into my grays. You know, when you're painting these things, you really want to keep your grays colorful as well, if possible. You know, gray isn't just like taking black and mixing white into it. That's actually, when you do that, you end up with very cool, mixes, because depending on the black that you're using, but I use ivory black if I'm going to. In this case, I've actually used a Rublev Cypress Umber Dark. So it's an umber. It's not even really, it's not a black that I'm working with. It's an umber, but it's a very neutral color. So you can kind of push it in different directions. Okay. I want to lead your eye over this way. I don't want you to, leave the scene here. So I want to bring your eye in through this area here, if I can. And to do that, I want to make these areas less interesting. Even though there's a little detail, I want to make them less interesting than this area that takes your eye through. Keeping your more intense colors towards your focal area is always a good idea too. So I'm going to go back, speaking of that, I'm going to go back into this area towards the center and bring a little bit richer color through here and texture. And that gives me almost a halftone feeling when I do that. Whenever a light finds its way towards a shadow, you find you have more chroma or more intensity of color. And again, it's that idea of working chromatically, like the rainbow. All right. I'd like to bring a couple of more details in to the foreground area. So we need to get through something here to get to the background. More texture in the foreground is okay, because we see more in the foreground than we do in the background. So there's lots of texture going on back there, but I want to make sure that you really get a sense that this is the foreground here. I'm going to go into this area with some really rich darks now. Just really jam those in. It's a really fun way to paint. A combination of the palette knife and your brush and letting loose paint do what it's going to do. There's another little thing that I like to do, and I would again recommend that you use a glove when you're doing this, because it's you're going to end up with paint all over your hands if you don't. But I'm going to show you a little technique that's kind of fun. I don't know if you remember in school, sometimes in kindergarten, really early on in our art lives, we used to do these things with toothbrush brushes, where we would dip a toothbrush into paint and then we would spray it. We would flick it like this. So I want to do that. I'm going to grab a little bit of thinner and I'm going to take that into the darker color that I have here. And I'm just going to flick that, and you can see what happens. I get a lot of texture when I do that. Went a little too high. I went up in that area there. So you have to do this with some control. It takes a little practice, but you can do it. And I can even go into my lighter grays and do the same thing. So I've got a sense of, you can put some light into the darks this way and darks into the lights. Kind of a nice technique, nice thing, nice way to create texture if you're trying to get to it quickly and get a sense of what's going on. I'm just going to take that glove off now. I'll go through a few gloves when I do this. Now, because there's enough paint down in these areas, I flicked paint into those areas, I can go back in, and even here, I just have to brush it out a little bit. Those areas that I don't want to have little dots. Up here, I can even use a Q-tip if I want to. Put my hand on one here, and I can take color out using a Q-tip. Just dip it in my thinner here, and I can just rub that out there. So if I've got little dots that I don't want, that's another way of dealing with them. All right. Okay. Now I want to get, there's a lot of magenta going on through here. I'm going to have to eliminate some of that. And now I'm going to go into this with a smaller brush, if I can find one here, and just address some of the detail areas here. Grab some of that color that I had pre-mixed ahead of time and just start to paint around the subjects here. That magenta is almost set up now so that, you know, it accepts good paint, a good bunch of paint over top of it, and that works just fine. Again, I have to watch for these little bits that when I was mixing my color, I had a little bit of older color that had dried up a bit, and it got into my fresh paint. So it's always a good idea just to use fresh paint, but I hate throwing it away, so I do go back in and try and save whatever paint that I can use. And what I can't save, sometimes I just put on a blank canvas or on a board, and I use that to paint over later when it's dry. I'll paint over that and create some scenery or something out of the textures that I get from that. Okay, so now I've got a little more control here. You can see this sky taking shape. A few brush strokes into the area that was put down with a roller. I could even take a larger brush and just smooth that out a little bit. If you don't want to see those kind of textures, if you just want to leave brush strokes, that's fine. This works. In fact, I'll go in with a little more paint with a larger brush right into these areas here. The nice thing about working on an oil primed board is that if at some point in time I really don't like what I'm seeing, I can go back and take that off. It literally comes back to white as long as you catch it within the first few hours. Some paints stain more than others, so you know it takes a little getting used to knowing which paints will come off easily and those that don't, but that's just practice. That's all. So this is an area that, you know, it's a larger area that could be quite dull. So to keep it interesting, sometimes you just want to change up the color a little bit. So I'm going to do that. I'm just going to bring in a color that sort of works with these colors here and just introduce that into an area over here. Mix that in. Maybe there's some cloud there. I'm going to go into a little darker blue. And all I'm doing really at this stage is just trying to create more interest in the color shapes, not getting too hung up on detail, as you can see. It's a smaller brush, which you have to be careful because that can get you into fiddly stuff, maybe that you don't want there. So treat your smaller brushes like you would your large ones. Paint with it boldly. I'm going to bring a little more magenta in, get a little bit of a violet going in here. So there's a transition of color into these colors here. Okay. And again, clean your brush regularly. It's important to do that so that you have nice fresh color when you put it down. Okay, I'm gonna go back into this area here, poke a couple little holes through this tree here. There we go. See the sky coming through there now. I also want to get some more greens going in that area so that's not just a lonely tree sitting there. I'll put a little bit more in with a palette knife in a couple of areas. And I can put in some warmer greens, cooler greens, mix them up a little bit so that they're not all one green. We very rarely see one green that finds its way through everything. When I say that, you may have a green theme to something, but you want to try and keep your greens lively. Keep mixing them up, working between warm and cools, and get out your ochres. They happen in nature too. So a few little spots there, and maybe something over here. There's one dominant tree right there. So I'm going to go into that, and I would actually like to bring a little bit of detail into that. So I'm going to grab the brush. I can find the right one. That would be good. Okay, I think I got it. And I want to bring a little bit of detail into that tree because it's kind of a focal area. I'm doing this with a little bit of color in the brush. So I'm not using black. It just looks dark. There's a bit of color there. And I can pop in a couple of darks through these areas here as well, so that we have a sense of shrubbery back here, a few little details. And you can see how this starts to pull together, hopefully. I'm going to bring some of those colors into this area here too. Again, trying to keep your darks interesting. Keep them lively. It's okay if some of it's more transparent, some of it's more opaque. And that's fairly colorful, all of that. Now, this whole area up here is just the white of the prime that I have down there. And we don't really see, whites in nature. I know that sounds kind of strange. We know there are whites, but we don't actually see them as white because they are affected by the color of the light. So if it's a cool day, you're going to see blues in your whites. And if you want proof of that, you should just take a look at Sorolla's work, Joaquim Sorolla, and see all the different colors that he's got going in his whites. And the sails and all that kind of stuff. When he's painting boats, for example, there's this amazing painting of women mending sails, and it's just a magnificent painting. And the different colors, the violets, the yellows, the greens, there's so many different colors going in that painting. Okay, I'm just going to get rid of these stark whites here. I'm using a brush here because I sort of feel when you use a brush with clouds, I don't know about you, but when I look into the sky, sometimes I just sort of see brush strokes. It looks like a painting to me. I'm going to pull that clip off of there just to clean that up underneath. There we go. And, clouds make these odd shapes sometimes. You want to keep your skies interesting. And the idea of bringing the eye through into this area, it can continue up into the sky, but maybe not take your eye out of the sky. You want to have enough interest to bring you back to this area here. So, okay. Now this here, that zone right there is getting too much attention. So I'm just going to gray it down. I'm going to grab some of the gray that I have on my palette, and I'm just going to knock that back. It's not interesting there. It's not important there. And I can take color that's around it. I can even take color that's from the foreground and bring that in and just tap that in there. As it goes back, it gets less detailed, less important. You know, you can learn from watching Bob Ross, maybe even more than you're learning from me. I don't know. He had all these great little techniques for softening things down. It's okay to learn from whoever you need to. That's really the rule. Whatever works for you when you're painting. I'm going to bring a little more life into some greens in this area here. This is quite a warm green. I've got a combination of excuse me, manganese blue and cadmium yellow. So there's a lot of warmth there, and that makes that pop off a little bit. I want to break this area up just a little more so that our eye is looking into this zone. And the magentas that are coming through are okay. I just have to be careful that they're not overpowering. So I'm going to go into the magentas that I see and just soften them out a little bit here and there so they're not getting too much attention, but getting just enough. And that's a feel thing, you know, for some people, they want to see a lot of those little things peeking through. You can always add magenta in afterwards, by the way. Now, this is transparent, the way I put it down, but if I were to take, for example, some magenta and white, in fact, I'm going to use something that's called permanent rose. It's similar to magenta. It's not exactly the same, but I'm going to put a little bit of that into a couple of areas, and that's a color that'll pop out and also help bring your eye into the foreground a little here. I sort of feel like I need more color coming into this foreground so that it relates to what's going on back here. Again, with a soft brush, pulling a few of these colors together here, allowing for texture, dropping. You know, nature has all kinds of interesting textures, and we can imitate that just by dropping in a few little bits of, few pieces of texture here and there. I want to go back into this color. It's kind of sitting all alone up in here, and I do want to bring it down a little further. So I'm going to do that. And I'm warming that color up just a little bit so that pulls it into the foreground more. And now my eye is drawn up through this a little more. Watch your rhythms when you're painting like this. You know, do you feel something that takes you through this and brings your eye up into the distance? It's always good to think about how rhythm works in a painting. I want to put a few more grays over just here, just to anchor this a little more. And you know, when you're using a palette knife, you just lay it in. Really, we should do that more with our brushes. We're not sort of caressing the canvas, we're trying to lay color onto the canvas or onto the board. So that's just something to be thinking about. I'm at a point here where I want to bring in just a couple more little highlights. I don't want to get too pretty about this, but I want to get a few more colors that take our eye up into this area. These are very minor little details, but they can make a difference. I'm even going to bring a couple down into the foreground here. These, if you find an area is kind of dull, it's not working, just little spots of color can make all the difference in the world. And again, if the values are similar, that can work very nicely. Okay, I'm going to go back into that sky again, and I'm going to put a nice big heaping cloud in there. I like what's happening here, but it's a shape that I want to define a little better. And again, this is a feel thing. You know, how much do you put in? How much do you leave alone? How much is necessary? And less is more. Always less is more. So I'm going to go back into this area here, knock back some of those magentas again. Let them peek through here and there, but don't let them take over. All right. So, okay, I'm going to come back to you here. At this stage, I kind of like to leave it alone and have a look at that. Maybe tomorrow or the next day, maybe take it a little further. We'll see. I've got the basics down of what I wanted, and I may take this a little further or not. Like sometimes it's just really nice to leave it alone, keep it fresh, let it say what it needs to say. But I'm hoping that that was interesting for you. Again, using rollers, using brushes, keeping your color more intense towards the focal area, keeping activity going and thinking about your color harmonies. Pre-mix your colors ahead of time. If you do that, if your colors are working on your palette, then your colors are also going to work, hopefully, are going to work on your painting as well, as long as you put them in the right place. So I hope you enjoyed this, and thanks for checking in. I do appreciate that folks are, saying hello and making comments. I do appreciate that. Again, I'm going to just show you the finish here. There we go. And I'll come back, and looking forward to doing the next one already. I don't know when that's going to be because it's been really busy right now, so bear with me. I'm trying to do one of these a week. I've been fairly consistent doing these just on Fridays, but it's going to be a busy season coming up with teaching as well, and other things that are going on in our lives. So let me know what you think. And again, thanks for showing up and checking this out. Happy painting, be well, and stay safe. Bye now.